Well, we're on the line of the proposed bypass around Cannington. The route has been talked about for several years, and as part of the assessment and evaluation work linked with the archaeological programme, a series of test pits, trial trenches were excavated a couple of years ago and showed that there were indeed various remains of prehistoric and Roman date in this field. And what we're seeing now is the excavation of the whole route of the road focused around this, in this case, a particularly important Roman site. It's early days yet. It's only the sort of second week of getting into the excavation. It's fairly clear that there are 2 or 3 phases of building. Some repairs have gone on, and yet next to that building there's a massive ditch which has also got some Roman material thrown into it. And at the other end, further to the eastern end of the 2 buildings, there are 2 Roman buildings. We're now finding circular ditches which are evidence of some very substantial Iron Age buildings.
The Iron Age remains weren't entirely surprising because behind me in that direction is Cannington Camp, which is a large Iron Age hill fort. And the entrance to Cannington Camp faces southeast, which is basically pointing directly towards us and where we are now. So it's probably a little farm on the approach to the hill fort.
Pottery dating from the ditches suggests first century BC, that is, and it gives us a clue that these buildings were perhaps 10, 12 metres diameter, so quite substantial buildings that would have been made of timber and then clay walls and wattle and daub and a thatched roof, most likely.
So this is one of our roundhouses. It's very hard to see because the ground's dried a lot, but it's this sort of ring of 3 concentric curving ditches. At the moment, we've only got about half of it exposed. We anticipate there being a lot more under that area behind the barriers that we're yet to strip.
Well, I've got in my hands at the moment a piece of Iron Age pottery, which is probably a jar. And you can see at the top here a piece of the rim. So it's fairly typical. There's a lot of pottery being found on this site from the Iron Age and from the Roman period as well.
We've got another curving ditch here, which is again quite hard to see, but it's this blacker stuff that you can just make out there, and that one seems to sweep round here. The reason you can see less of it than this one is because it's been cut by the walls of this Roman building. So that's one wall foundation, which is sort of rubbly over there, and then slightly better, well-built one here. And it's a big rectangular structure with 2 rooms in it. One wall is coming through here. It's this pink sandstone and it's bonded with clay. Then there's the internal wall behind me and the other side of the room over there. We think that side of this building was probably open. There's a little bit of stonework in the middle, which may have been the base for a sort of timber frame, something propping up the roof possibly. The other room just behind me here, so I'm stood on the dividing wall. And then now I'm into the other room, which has got all 4 sides. There's some large slabs over just on my left-hand side, which we think is a sort of threshold or doorway leading out onto an external area.
This is a piece of a plate, and we can see the rim, and this part was to put the lid on and to stop it. So it was like more or less this shape, around the shape, not very deep, and it was a kind of pottery you could find on the table of someone. So it's good quality pottery. It's not something for the storage of the food or to cook it, just to present it on the table. So this tiny piece of glass, quite rare because it's really fragile, and it was probably part of something, I don't know, maybe a glass, because Roma normally didn't use glass for the windows, but just to make like glasses and container of other type. It's not easy to find glass because you see it's really thin, so it's quite uncommon to find something like that. So it's quite interesting.
Much of this part of the hill has in fact been quarried away. There's large areas of quarry pits. I mean, quarrying is a tradition in this part of Cannington, the North End quarry, the later quarries in the 60s. But it's very clear now that this quarrying's going on in medieval times. And what we're seeing behind us is in fact the quarries have chopped around, and rather randomly the site, the archaeological site, the Roman building, has only had one corner chopped off. And we're very lucky that in fact that has survived, because a fair bit of the rest of this hillside is pockmarked with these very substantial quarries, up to 3 meters deeper and more, where people have dug in to retrieve the natural red sandstone.
We've got this sort of limestone foundation of this square room here. This is interesting because it's quite different to the rest of the building, which is sandstone, and it's much more nicely made. It's mortared, faced walls. That suggests that the building was built in more than one phase, possibly with that phase being earlier, and with this being an extension. Where I'm stood now, just walked over a wall and I'm in a separate room, which is this sort of small square. It's about 4 meters across and 4 meters in width. What we're quite excited about is there's these narrow channels here. There's one coming in this direction, one going off over there, and one coming towards this sort of mortared surface. And what we're hoping this is a hypocausts. We know where Sean's working, that there's another floor surface about a foot below the one that you can see here. And there's some box flue tiles, which is again evidence of the hypocausts system. So we're hoping when we take off this surface, which was probably plastered and polished, in some places you can see sort of smooth patches. So rather than, it looks rather rough at the moment, but it probably would have been a polished, a nice polished floor. We're hoping when we take this off, we may have a proper hypocausts system surviving underneath that.
There's still at least another few weeks' work here before we can say this site is cleared of its archaeology, and indeed so that we've understood the archaeology, which will be removed as and when the site is then passed over to the construction phase and the bulldozers come in, and all of this site will disappear.
This is our hypocaust as we've got it at the moment. You would have hot air flowing around these tiles. These are called pile, these stacks of tiles. There's a flue coming through into this room from another heated room back here. Our best guess at the moment of what these rooms are is probably a small bathhouse with heated floors.
We found that there's this large construction cut when they've originally built the building. The wall I'm stood on, we think, is one of the earliest parts of it, so the original phase. This originally would have continued about a metre or two in front of me and then turned in the corner to join onto that stump there, creating a little room in here. We think that's been demolished probably in the Roman period. And to my left, this is an internal wall that then later became an external wall once they demolished that room. So we've got a small room here, we've got a medium-sized room to my left, which has got underfloor heating, and then we've just got the hint of another room over there, which we've lost almost entirely because of medieval or post-medieval quarrying. So perhaps if that is a bath, which we believe at the moment it is likely to be, you've got sort of a more domestic area over here, and then the corridor, and then going into the bath area further to the east. So we think there's one wall of the corridor here and the other there, so you'd be walking through the middle here. What my colleague's taking out at the moment is the infill of what we think are probably drains running underneath the corridor. And we're trying to establish whether or not that has anything to do with feeding water to the heated rooms, which may or may not have had baths in them.
So this is a brooch that dates from the 1st to 2nd century AD. It's a T-shaped brooch. It would have had a pin on the back of it, usually used to fasten clothing, cloaks and such things like that. And on the front there is little inlays where you'd probably have had enamel, so it wouldn't have originally been this degraded green colour. It had been a much better looking object than this. We have other personal items such as bone pins. This is quite a nice example of one. It is a whole pin. It could be used as a hairpin or through an item of clothing again. Given it's bone and quite fragile, it's more likely a hairpin more than anything else. It is quite a nicely decorated head to it as well, which resembles a sort of a little pine cone or something like that. Another example of a bone pin, only half this one. This was very smooth, as if it's been polished. A much simpler design on the head, probably of a similar sort of age, of an Iron Age, Romana, British date. So this is quite an interesting one. Usually you find them made out of stone, but this one is a shard of pottery that's been recycled into a spindle whorl. It has a hole in the middle, and it acts as a weight on the bottom of a stick, which at the top you'd have your wool attached to, and you would spin this round, and it'd make your sort of woolen thread, woolen cord. So that's part of they were manufacturing fabrics on site from their sheep. Okay, this is part of our Roman building. It was found in the demolition of the hypocausts behind me. What's interesting about this is we have a paw print in this tile. So obviously in the tile maker's yard when he was laying them out and they were all still wet, he's had animals walking over them. Another interesting thing is there may be some graffiti on the tile there. We're not sure what the letters are, but it looks a bit too regular to be impressed grass. You do sometimes find bits of grass and seed that have blown onto the tile and become impressed within it. But this looks quite a regular, quite a deliberate scoring of the tile. It would probably have formed part of the hypocausts, what we call pile, these stacks of tile on top of each other to give you a raised floor surface. And then underneath that you'd have your hot air circulating to give you a nice warm room.
Today's been the open day on the Cannington bypass, looking at the opportunity to see the Roman building and indeed the Iron Age remains.
The archaeologist there, right, and then we'll get you out onto the site.
We've had a lot of questions about, did we know it was here? What are we going to do about it? How are we going to protect it? How are we going to preserve it? All those questions, and indeed our answers are about the need for archaeological recording, investigation and understanding.
Well, it's very interesting what I've seen today. I didn't realise it was here, to be honest. I'll tell you a little story though. I had a chap, when this EDF with the road bypass set off in 2008, a guy was coming up the hill with his bicycle with a spade tied to it on his crossbar and stopped me. He said, "Are you Mr. Day?" He said, "Because you've got a Roman villa in your field and I'm going to get the road stopped." And I thought he was, you know, Sam was short of a picnic perhaps, but he was dead right as it turned out.
But we did in fact have one metal detector chap come in today and hand in a Roman coin that he found here in 2002, and he's handed that to us, and we've got that now as part of the story. So had we known that at the time, that would have been another clue, but that's the value of information is often brought in when there's an opportunity for an open day and a visit such as this.
Okay, I said you're not going to see archaeology like this very often. What we're looking at here is a 2nd to 3rd century Roman building. This was to heat this room, underfloor heating, which we're now going back to, of course, as a sustainable way of living. Romans invented it.
We're seeing at least sort of nearly 3 feet of foundations. How big was the building? Was it stone wall up to 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet? I mean, the joy with a site like this, where you can actually see individual rooms, you can see the wall foundations, you can see the underfloor heating. It's really quite exciting when you come across a Roman building that has been so well preserved. This one has only been discovered as a direct result of the geophysical survey and testing work, and that opportunity that large-scale linear projects such as this road scheme gives us the chance to actually have a look at the whole story of the landscape.
Since the open day, we've completed our excavation of both of the first two buildings we exposed, so the bathhouse and the probable agricultural building. We've also stripped the rest of the area, and between the bathhouse and where I am now, we had mostly medieval quarrying until we got right up to the edge of the site by the hedge here, and we found this very substantial other building, which we think is probably going to be the domestic part of the villa complex. So at the moment I'm walking down the corridor and there's rooms going off to both my right hand side and to my left hand side. So we think it's about 25 metres in length and about 2.5 metres in width. At the moment, all we've really had the opportunity to do in here is clean up the walls to just define where they are. And then we've started taking off this layer of demolition, which spread over the top of the walls and then is down and in between them in the rooms. And what we found in that demolition deposit is lots of the sort of construction materials you'd expect, like bits of roof tile, bits of box flue tile, which again possibly suggests that there may have been a hypocausts in this building as well. So a lot of construction debris which we'd expect. We also found in this demolition rubble a really nice copper alloy pair of tweezers, which gives some indication of the type of people that were living here, if they could afford beauty kits and that sort of personal grooming equipment. As you can see, it's just a sort of rubble footings that we've got. So similarly to what we've seen in the other buildings, floor level would have been about knee height again. So any flooring like mosaics or probably any hypocausts or any underfloor heating, which we imagine is quite likely they would have had, bearing in mind they have it in the bathhouse. We've probably lost all of that, and all we're getting is just the very basic footprint of the building. We've only just started our excavation in here, so we haven't managed to get any of our dating material back to the office to confirm the dates, but it's very similar stuff. We imagine that it's all contemporary. The building techniques look quite similar. These rubble foundations and elsewhere, the nicer sandstone walls which would have been exposed. So just by looking at the similarity of the buildings, we think that they are very likely to be contemporary. Looking at the landscape, we're stood on the sort of promontory. The ground drops away both in that direction in front of me and behind me. So by building a villa on the top of the hill here, you're really sort of showing off your status, displaying it to everybody who can see. On a clear day, you can see for 10 miles in most directions. When we did the evaluation, we just found some, the hints of some walls. So even when we came back this summer, we weren't anticipating anything like the level of structural remains we found. We certainly weren't expecting hypocaustic buildings, and then to find 3 buildings with different functions was really exciting. And it's not the sort of thing that we find every day. This only happens sort of once a decade or so, so it's, it's a really fantastic project to work on.
And it's not just another Roman villa. There's maybe 2,000 Roman villas in all of Britain. But to find one here in West Somerset, in an area where they're actually not very well known, and also, more importantly than that, to find one which sits on top of an Iron Age site. So it's not just a Roman villa, Roman country house being plonked into the landscape. It's probably something evolving out of centuries of occupation and farming here on the edge of the Somerset levels is really important. So actually this site tells us an awful lot about West Somerset and indeed the nature of Roman Britain, because what was it that led people living here in West Somerset to adopt Roman ways, to move from living in round houses to living in square and rectangular ones. They embraced the Roman way of life. They bought into the Roman ideal, but they altered it as well. They adapted that Roman model that perhaps you would have seen if you walked through Rome or Pompeii, and adapted it to their local conditions. And so it says as much about the local people as it does about the nature of Roman incomers.
One of the key things about this site is putting it in its landscape context. Iron Age Hill Fort over there in the mist with its little crown of timber on the top, but actually would have been a very open and visible site. On the adjacent hill, now partly quarried away, is the remains of the cemetery that was excavated by Philip Raats in the 60s. That covered the whole top of that hill. Roman building would have been here. That's Dark Age site, this is the Roman site, and we've got Iron Age and prehistoric activity on this next little knoll. And then down in the dip is where the medieval settlement of Cannington became a focus. So the estate of Cannington now raises that question of what really was going on through time, from prehistoric, Iron Age, into Roman, Dark Age, and then medieval. So some very interesting stories have been thrown up from the archaeology here.